Hey everybody, welcome to Exposing the Nephilim, Part 3. So, this should be good, right? Today, I am going to go over the corruption of all flesh. What does that look like? What did that mean in Genesis when it said they profaned the name of the Lord? Like, exactly what does that mean? Did you ever wonder about that? A lot of people haven't. A lot of people just look at it and go, yeah, and start saying bad stuff about God. But what else was going on at that time? You know, what was happening then? So let's go ahead and roll the intro, and then I'll just get into the chapter. Nice. All right, so if you would like to partner with us in any way, shape, or form, tithe, subscribe, whatever, you want to get a copy of the book. The book's coming out here pretty soon. It's called The Mark of the Beast, From Creation to Revelation. I was going to put in a picture. Let me see. I have it here. I was going to put in a picture of the cover. The original cover, people didn't like the original cover because they said it was too demonic. So we had to redo the whole thing. Let me see if I can put it so that you can see it. But that's what the cover is going to look like now compared to what it was, which I think is pretty cool. That would make me want to read it, right? Like, oh, look, a dragon, DNA, 666. I mean, that looks pretty cool. Let's go ahead and go with that. So I put a lot, like literally years of research into this, and that's the cover. We're getting the stuff ready to be able to send to the publishers and stuff, and this book will be ready for sale. I want to say probably by the end of the month. We'll see. So if you're interested, let us know. There's several people who helped contribute to getting the book published, and of course you'll be getting a book for free. And everybody else, you'll be able to find it online at firesidegrace.com. Actually, let me fix that. Let me show you, give you all the information all right there at the bottom, and also in the description. So if this is going by too fast, you can either pause it or you can go down to the description, and all of it's right there. Okay, so let's see. Afternoon at work, headphones on and listening, and hello, it's good to see you. I'm glad you're here. All right, so the corruption of all flesh. Give me a second while I burp and take a sip of water, and then we'll get into this, shall we? Delicious, ice cold, crappy water, but it's good. Okay, now exit out this extra stuff. So get this, we've been praying, we've been interceding for people, we've been doing all the things that we know to do, helping out people, and I'm not going to tell you the things that we've been doing because we don't need to share that unless we come to you specifically asking you for help. But we did help that minister pay for his car repairs. We did help get him home. So all that is good. So thank you for that, folks. We've helped a lot of people this year. It's been a little slow. We haven't had a whole lot coming in where we're able to bless people, but the Lord knows exactly what people need and how he's going to bless them. So we just try and do our part, and then God will do the rest for everybody else. So let's get into this. This is chapter 4 of my book, The Corruption of All Flesh. And of course, I haven't read chapter 1 to you. I haven't read maybe chapter 3. I skipped over that whole chapter. I'm not going to read you all the chapters from the book, but I will probably, if you want, I can do a video series and we can sell the video series, but I kind of want that to be like more professional. I know that the Lord's going to get the word out and share this, and people are going to come to us and want to make this professional and want to do interviews on this in different places. So for now, we'll just focus on getting the book out there, okay? So when I think of the word profane, it brings to mind a great deal of things when I hear it. I often imagine something profane as something just being blasphemous towards God, like cuss words, cussing out God, profanity, like literally the word profanity. Like that's what comes to mind when I think of profane. But I never really stopped to question, why is cussing called profanity? What does cussing have to do with blaspheming God? Now, we didn't say cussing in New York, okay? That's a word that I picked up when I moved down south. They say cussing. The word cuss derived from the New England area in the United States. It was the word curse, but I say New Englanders have a tendency to have a hard R accent. I call it a hot ah. It's really a soft ah, so they say a soft R So they say hard R, hada. I call it the hada accent. But so it was curse, cuss, and then that became cuss. And then the Southerners adopted it. But typically in New York, we say swear. We call them swear words. Don't know why we call them swear words, because we're not swearing by anything. So actually, I don't know. We won't get there. A lot of people say, I swear to God, in New York. But anyway, the knowledge that was imparted to me from this study about the word profane, I think is pretty profound. And I'm going to share with you what I learned while researching this, okay? All right, one thing that stood out to me when I originally started to research this was that God did not destroy every creature that existed when he flooded the world. He didn't destroy everything that existed. You could say, oh, yeah, well, I mean, you know, the animals on the ark, Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, their 3 wives, that's 8 people. So obviously God didn't destroy everything. But it says this is different. It does say, and all flesh died that moved on the earth, birds and cattle and beasts and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, and every man, all in whose nostrils was the breath of the spirit of life, all that was on dry land died. So anything that was breathing, that had the breath of the spirit of life in it, all that was on dry land, that died. Notice that it doesn't say all of the creatures in the ocean. And what are the creatures that don't have the breath of life in them? Just a little food for thought for you. Just a little something to think about. Okay, so the dinosaurs, and this is I think I did a whole chapter on the dinosaurs and the origin of dinosaurs. But listen, the dinosaurs were part of this hybridization process that's referred to in Genesis as the corruption of all flesh. All flesh have been corrupted. In Genesis 6:12, it doesn't say that all mankind had corrupted their flesh alone, which is what we hear. We say, oh, well, all man has corrupted its flesh. But what it actually says in the literal translation from Hebrew is, and so looked God upon the earth, for had corrupted all flesh, and their way upon the earth. Behold, Semech. Okay? So it says, for had corrupted all flesh. Would it be Kal Nephalot? But whatever. All flesh was corrupted. Everything. And their way was corrupted. Meaning what they were doing was corrupted, but their flesh was also corrupted. Another tidbit that we tend to gloss over is that all flesh was corrupted. All right? Every single piece of flesh on earth, save what had been on the ark and mankind, that made it, the 8, except for the remnant of humans that were pure and a handful of wild beasts that were saved on the ark. Today, many people so desperately want to disprove the Bible and push their theory of evolution on the world that they disregard the scripture and say, why doesn't the Bible mention dinosaurs? That's a good question. Allow me to answer that question in the next chapter, but that's a question for then. For the next chapter, okay? The Canaanite people were well known for sleeping with animals, as were the Greeks and pretty much every other world religion out there. Old world religion, not like the modern stuff. Like, I don't think in Islam, Christianity, Judaism, you know, this stuff that wasn't going on. But the Canaanites, the pagan gods, etc., it was happening, okay? There's myths everywhere about some part human, part animal in every culture, okay? It's not just like in that Levant area or, you know, the Middle East or Europe, etc. It's everywhere, okay? So the Canaanite people were known for this. The Greeks were known for this. The Babylonians, Mesopotamians, Amorites, etc. The mythology of almost all of the ancient world religions speak of the gods having children with animals and creating half-human hybrid children. In fact, the word Titan means giant. The name Titus means from the giants. We claim that this is just nonsense, hogwash, and we dismiss it, but the Bible clearly tells us that there were human beings that had beast-like features. The very fact that God had to tell Israel not to have sex with animals and mate or breed with them is evidence that this was still happening. And it says, right, Leviticus 18:23 and 24, nor shall you mate with any animal to defile yourself with it, nor shall any woman stand before an animal to mate with it. It is perversion. do not defile yourselves with any of these things, for by all these the nations are defiled, which I am casting out before you. The nations that were defiled were Canaanite nations, which is where the hybrid giants were coming from. The word defile here is altamia, and it is a variant of the same root word that's used to describe Noah in Genesis 6, tamim. Now, in Genesis 6, it means perfect, intact, pure, and undefiled, and it's describing Noah's genetics. In the passage from Leviticus 18, there's the word al in front of it, which signifies no or not in this sense. Usually it's low, but at this point, it means not. So altamia means not perfect, not pure, defiled, not intact, not whole, and unclean, or not clean. Okay? We cannot further understand the type of wholeness that's referring to the physical traits and attributes by researching more in the book of Leviticus, specifically in chapter 1. All right, so 21 verse 17, it says, Speak unto Aaron, saying, Whosoever he be of thy seed, in their generations that hath any blemish, let him not approach to offer the bread of his God. Now, in Genesis 6:9, we see that Noah was blameless in his generation. So the word for blameless is tamim, like I had said, and this word is a variant of the word mum, which means defect. In Leviticus, this word is the singular version of Leviticus 17, and it's the plural version in Genesis 6. We also see the word tamim in Hebrew regarding sacrificial animals, and it refers to any physical genetic defect that an animal can be born with. So understanding what the pure and spotless sacrifice meant shows us that Noah was pure and spotless in his genetics. He had no blemishes, no defects, no genetic defects that made him not able to be used as a sacrifice. Now, this word is always used in correlation with genetic defect in the Bible. I know that's like a hard thing to understand, but it literally is every single time. Now, in the days of Noah, something had to have happened that was creating genetic mutations, which God considered blemishes that would make someone unfit for sacrifice. Because if we make an animal unfit for sacrifice, then it can make a human unfit for sacrifice. Now, see, when you look into the New Testament in the book of Revelation, when it talks about the Therian creatures that are coming, when it talks about the beasts, etc., uses that word Therian, and that means a wild animal that is unfit for sacrifice because it's unclean. It's not genetically pure. Okay? We'll get into that another time. But there's a lot of passages that say, and they altered, changed, or transformed themselves to resemble creatures, beasts, animals, birds, insects, etc. Okay? So, listen, in the days of Noah, something had to have happened that was creating these genetic mutations. We know that the sacrifice that God was looking for was the sacrifice of his son, the Lamb of God. So he had to be pure and spotless. Satan and his demons were causing humanity to sin against animals. I say his demons, they're the fallen angels that fell with him at this point. I probably should correct that word, but Satan and his demons were causing humanity to sin against animals and interbreed with them. And we actually see that. I don't recommend reading the book of Enoch. I don't recommend using it as a canonical text or a Canaan text because there's so many things in it that are wrong, that are not biblically inspired. I believe that the verses that are biblically inspired are in the Bible, and there's a lot of them. There's like over 10,000 references to the book of Enoch. But not everything in the book of Enoch is accurate, is biblical, lines up with the Word of God. So I would say that that's not an inspired version of something that should be in the Bible. There's probably a lot more demonic influence in that than what you would think. That's personally why, and also, we can't go back and cross-reference it to original Hebrew. It's not there. And if we could, we would look at it and be like, well, that's completely wrong. That doesn't line up with this. That doesn't line up with that. It says at some point Enoch talked to Noah. Enoch was gone before Noah was born. He was gone, off this planet. It says that Enoch sat in the land of Dan and looked towards Lebanon. He said, and I, Enoch, sat in the land of Dan and looked towards the country of Lebanon. Those countries didn't even exist. Dan wasn't even born for another, 1,000 years after Enoch disappeared? Lebanon didn't exist. It's like, so you can't take the book of Enoch and say, this is Canaan, period. It's referenced in the Bible, therefore it's Canaan. It's not. There's a reason for it. Now, I'm not against, you can pick through, you can find the things that are accurate, but if it doesn't line up with the Word of God, then it's not accurate. And there's a lot of things in it that don't line up. All right, so, but it does talk about some stuff in there, okay? God said that mating with animals is what made those nations unclean that he cast out of the promised land. And what was he casting out of the promised land when they went in? Giants. So they were unclean how? They had genetic defects. And it wasn't just that they were born with 6 fingers and 6 toes. It was because they were intermingled with something that wasn't human, all right? So the Canaanite giants. This is a tidbit we overlook in this verse. To be unclean in this context means to be impure and not intact genetically, as we established. So the giants were genetically impure. So you may be thinking, well, that just means they became ceremonially unclean. Let me take a sip real quick. Well, that can't be the only reason that God said not to mate with animals. Oh, God's like, oh, well, listen, I'm going to put this in a not PG way. God was just saying, quote unquote, all right, we're going to look at this from a progressive viewpoint. God was just saying, don't have sex with an animal or you can't make a sacrifice to him. He wasn't saying that if you have sex with an animal, you literally become unclean, impure, you're defiled. It's disgusting, first of all. Things that we can look forward to when these creatures come back. Absolutely disgusting. The giants were genetically impure. It can't be the only reason that God said not to mate with animals. Mating isn't just a word that means to have sex. It also means to reproduce. So we see examples of beast-human hybrids in Genesis 14. And in this chapter, in Genesis 14, we see the word Hazuzim, and it's just used to describe a tribe of Rephaim mentioned in Genesis 14:5, and it actually makes its way into Daniel's dream when he sees the quote-unquote he-goat. The word that's actually used is the Hazuzim. He sees the Hazuzim and describes this Hazuzim as being both male and female and had 2 heads. One head went this way, one head did that way. Hazuzim. Well, that's a Rephaim tribe. That's a tribe from the Middle East. That's literally a tribe from the land of Sodom and Gomorrah in that area that he mentioned in the end of days that was tied to the beast. Get into that into another chapter also. So it's used to describe a Rephaim, which is what most people call Nephilim, but Nephilim are fallen angels. They are not the offspring of fallen angels. They are not, the Nephilim are fallen angels, period. They aren't human beings. They aren't mixed with human beings, okay? The Rephaim, that's a word that is used strictly for these beasts, okay? It's also the word that they use for their idols also, which are half human, half animal, etc. Okay, Genesis 14:5, it says, and in the 4th year came Kedorlaomer, or however you say it, and the kings that were with him, and smote the Rephaim in Ashtaroth Karnaim, and the Zozims in Ham, and the Emims in Sheva Kiriathim. Emim means the terrible, fearful, dreadful ones. The Zuzims is the Hazuzim in Hebrew, and it means the goat people. Right? This word Hazuzim originates from the word ziz, which means beast or abundance, and it also means breasty. And these were beast hybrids, which means that they were part animal. The word ziz is derived from the word az, which means goat. So in all likelihood, these giants were part goat. They lived in the land of Ham, which we know as the land of Canaan, and the Canaanites were Rephaim. From what I believe, from my research, all of them were. The reason I'm bringing all of this up is that I found scriptures in the Bible that correlate to all of this information, so I'm laying the foundation for a revelation that's going to change your entire outlook on end times doctrine, okay? Now, at face value, this appears to be straightforward, that after when we read Genesis chapter 4, verse 26, it says, to him also was born a son, and he named him Enosh. Then man began to call upon the name of the Lord. At face value, this appears to be straightforward, and it's saying, after 238 years, men finally started to have communion with God again. They started to call on the name of God. Well, that is not the case. If humankind was not talking with God and not being righteous, not listening to his word, not performing his will, than all those prior verses in that chapter where Cain and Abel brought offerings to the Lord, where God spoke to Cain face to face, would contradict themselves because God was speaking to them. He had a relationship with them. He talked to them face to face. Isn't that something? That from Cain and Abel, God could still talk to man face to face. Isn't that something? But by the time of Moses, 1654, about 2,000 years later or so, by the time of Moses, mankind could no longer look on the face of God because we'd become so corrupted and so sinful. Isn't that interesting? Cain, who slew his brother Habel, could look at the face of God. Cain was the first one that was marked also. Just want to put that out there. He was marked by God, but he was still marked. That was the first mark. All right, now, we're not going to get into that. That's another story for another time. What we see when we dig into the meat of verse 26, Genesis 4:26, is a story of the origin of what will become known as the men of renown in Genesis 6:4. And I'm going to try and get through this, and I'm going to wrap this up by 4. So if I have to move forward from this, then I will do a part 2, and I'll move forward from this. I'll do a part 2 on this the next week, okay? But hopefully I can get through it. So let's take a look at this, all right? Let's look at the word Enos. What does Enos mean? Enos means man, typically refers to mortal man. So this is where we see the appearance of the first mortal man. Immortal meant they could live for a very long time, up to 1,000 years, all right? So let's look at the name Enos, man, okay? God uses names throughout the Bible to paint a picture of what was being done in certain time periods or what God was doing. The next word we need to look at here is huhal, which is Strong's 2490, and this word is translated as men began, right? Now, I know these words off. I don't have these cited in the book because I know these words off the top of my head. I couldn't tell you exactly what the number was, but I could tell you exactly what the word was and what it means, okay? So Enosh means man, huhal. This word translates as men began, but if you read the Strong's definition, it means they began to defile, to bore, to pierce, to profane, to begin, as in opening something with a wedge, to pollute, to wound, or to cut with a sword or knife. I find that very interesting because one of the things I learned from my friend Brian is that at the time Azazel came down, he was teaching men and women, how to alter their appearance, starting out with doing tattoos, with doing makeup, changing their hair, how they would look, etc. And so what you learn from this is that they started to intermingle human seed with animal seed, and that comes from the book of Enoch also. Now remember, the book of Enoch also says that human seeds intermix with angel seeds, but they say that the humans mixed with animals. So what is it? One or the other, or both? Or I mean, how can you mix something that even in the flesh, there's no instance in the Bible where an angel has children. I just want to point that out. No instance, whether they were in heaven or whether they're in hell. No instance. They don't even have babies with other angels. Why is that? Because reproduction is something only for the earth kingdom. That might be hard for you to understand or to believe, but it's the truth. But anyway, the word profane I found was very interesting. I want to say, what does profane even mean? The word profane is derived from a Latin word profanus, which means outside of the temple. So this paints a picture for us that shows not only that they were irreverent toward the name of God, but they defiled and polluted something outside the temple of God. So it's my speculation that the line of Cain, and eventually whoever was a son of God, that stopped following God in order to procreate with these hybrid beast children of Adam, profaned the outside image of the temple of God. That image being the glory of God, or the appearance of man that was created in the image of God. One scripture says that seems to coincide with this is 1 Corinthians 11:7, when it says, "Man indeed ought not to cover his head, for as much as he is the image and glory of God, but the woman is the glory of man." So now the next we're going to look at is Strong 7121. It's lacro, and this word means to call upon. But that's only the surface of understanding with this word. As we continue to dive into it and study the word, I discovered that it's also defined as to bewray oneself. Now, I had to take a while to look up what the word bewray means because it doesn't show up in modern dictionaries. It's an antiquated word. We find that it means to speak ill of someone, to divulge, all right, to spill tea, basically. It originates from the Hebrew word kara, which has a wide variety of applications, but used in tandem with li as the front. Likro means to bewray. We can ascertain the proper meaning of the word likro, which actually means to aggressively challenge somebody. So they didn't just call on, they aggressively challenged. It's like they were taunting God to his face, like Goliath did when he called on the people of Israel and said, come on, send your best fighter over here, blah, blah, blah. You know, he's mocking God by mocking the people of Israel. The next thing we need to understand is the word Bashem. Now, ba is a prefix, which can mean of, when, or in, coming, to come, in that, etc. You know, so it's a pretty versatile prefix. Shem is defined by Strong's, and it means name, essentially. Mark, renown, memorial, or a conspicuous position or appellation. All right. Now, when something remarkably similar to this appears later in the Bible, we call it's in correlation to the mark of the beast in the book of Revelation 13:17. It says, no man might buy or sell save he that had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Isn't that interesting? So they had to have a mark, name, renown, or memorial, okay? So they had to have the name, right? We have two words to pay attention to here in the book of Revelation, also the word chargama for mark and the word onomos for name. Chargama is as close a word as you can get to the word halal in the Old Testament. It literally means to engrave, to stamp, to cut, to pierce, to bore, or to carve. Now, the purpose of this is to reshape an object in such a way that it bears the likeness of someone or something. That's what a chargama is. It's when you carve something into an image, okay? The best example of this is how we engrave an image on a coin. It starts out as a plain piece of metal, which is then engraved and takes on the shape, characteristic, and form of the image that it was crafted to look like. It's not the original image, it's a copy of the image. For example, an American quarter starts out as a piece of silver-ish metal. It used to be silver, now it's zinc and a bunch of other stuff, but it's not actually silver, it's very little silver. Then it's heated, stamped with a picture of George Washington, and now the quarter bears the image and likeness of George Washington. It now has his mark on it. It now has his fame and his renown, okay? We also see here the word anomos, which bears a striking resemblance to the word Shem, not in physicality, but the definition. In this case, anomos means name, character, fame, reputation, or renown. Now stick with me. This is all important to understanding the origin of demons. The Hebrew mindset of the time was that someone's name was inseparable from who they were as a person. For example, in America, when we see the name King David, we see a title and a name. David means one who loves or one who is beloved. So to the Hebrew mind, they see King David, which would be Malek David, or it means king who loves or king who is beloved. Okay? The name not only identifies who a person is, but it also identifies the characteristics and physical and spiritual traits as well. So King David was also called ruddy, which means red. It's noted that King David had red hair through history. Esau was said to be born covered in hair that was as thick as a carpet, so you couldn't see his skin, and he was red all over. This is how they called him ruddy as well. So Esau was a redhead. That means somewhere in Noah's family line were redheads. And if you go back and track the history, the first Egyptians, Mizraim, which were direct descendants of Ham, the son of Noah, had red hair. The first Egyptian pharaohs had red hair and green or blue eyes. You should go look into that, all right? Eventually, they got a little darker and mixed, etc., but originally, it was red hair, blonde hair, and blue or green eyes, Caucasian skin. They actually, if there's a mummy on display that they took from Egypt, that was one of the first pharaohs, that had red hair and green eyes, and it was natural red hair. It was not dyed red hair. All right. So just this century, all right, this is in 1903, where there was the remains of a mummy that was identified as Queen Hatshepsut. Her later ancestor, Ramses, also had red hair. They did DNA tests on Ramses and confirmed that the root of the DNA showed that he was naturally born with red hair. Should be noted that Ramses did dye his hair in old age. Nevertheless, that doesn't take away from the fact that his DNA showed that he was a ginger. So the reason I'm pointing this out is simply to confirm that red hair was not an anomaly that was uncommon to the Middle Eastern regions of Africa. Now, getting back on track, when you look at Genesis 4, you see the same mark of the beast was subtly mentioned when they stated men began to call on the name of God. They began to kuhal, or mark, pierce, or profane the name of God, the mark, image, or memorial of God. What image? They began to alter the image of God? They began to cut, pierce, or wound the image of God? It says they began to cut and pollute the image, mark, or memorial of God and profane the outside of the temple. Now, this is the earliest known reference to the mark of the beast in the Bible, to me, okay? We see this in subtle ways happening throughout the Bible as a mockery of God. And what I mean by this is when an invading army would come and take over Jerusalem, they would sacrifice unclean animals inside the temple. And so they would pollute or profane the temple with the blood of an animal that was not acceptable to the Lord to be mixed in his house, in his temple. Okay? This is a type of foreshadowing of the pollution of the human body with animal blood and post-shadowing. After all, our bodies are what? The temple of the Lord. It says we are living bricks that make up the temple, that our bodies are the temple of the Holy Spirit. Do you see why the first thing these pagan worshipers would do when they came to Jerusalem was to slaughter animals that weren't fit for sacrifice in the temple? It was demons mocking God like they did before the flood. This is stuff that I haven't heard anybody talk about. But this is in the book. This is stuff that's not out there. This is direct revelation from the book. Probably not going to be able to get through this whole chapter in the next 13 minutes, but we're going to try. All right? Let's take a quick jump back to Genesis 6:4. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and afterwards as well, when the sons of God had relations with the daughters of men, and they bore them children who became the mighty men of old, men of renown. One key word we have, we must look at. It gives us the biggest clue that's hidden in plain sight here. While writing this chapter, I came across something very interesting. What I like to do when I'm researching scripture is learn the translation of every single word in a verse that I'm reading, not just the one word. And there's a lot of fruit that's hidden between the lines in Hebrew words. Now, one rabbit trail that I went down had all the possible variations of the word lachem, okay, which means them. All right, it means to them, lochem, lachem. Okay, and this is a peculiar word that doesn't make it into the translation in English for whatever reason. This is a word that simply means to them. However, it doesn't get a Strong's translation, which got me curious. Why was that? There was, and this is just this is a rabbit trail, okay? There was no meaning given. I had to go on a quest to cover the etymology of the word, and there were actually several different meanings of this word when it's used throughout different times in the Bible where it gets a translation. But the translation, they're like, oh, it could possibly mean this, but it could also mean this. In Genesis 6:4, it means to them. It's a combination of the letter lamed, which means to, and chemem, okay, which combines to mean to them. Simple enough, right? Perhaps not. When we dissect this word and analyze the symbolic meaning of each of the Hebrew letters, we see something very interesting. Now allow me to explain. The three letters used in the word are lamed, he, and mem. Hebrew letters are a type of pictograph. They all have a symbolic representation and a sound associated with them. It makes sense to me because after the fall at the Tower of Babel, men would draw pictures to help them understand words and pronunciations because it helps to associate the sound of a letter or to tell a story with there being a need to translate to understand each other. So, example, cave paintings. We can determine what a cave painting is telling us without needing words. So this concept applies in this situation. So you say water, ma'im, starts with an M for water, A for apple, apple, like we're teaching kids. And when you associate a sound with a letter, and letter, the sound with a letter with a picture, it helps you to understand it. Learn how to speak Hebrew, very similar. They show you a picture, they tell you the word, etc. We all learn the same way. Isn't it interesting how that just kind of carries over? For example, we're going to focus on the original Proto-Semitic or First Semitic alphabet, which is the closest alphabet that Moses used when he wrote the book of Genesis, which was pretty much Egyptian Semitic. So let's begin with Lamed. Lamed was originally a symbol of a shepherd's staff, and it stood for leadership and to be yoked or united together. Next, we have He. This was originally a man with his arms raised up, and it stood for breath, air, spirit, or femininity. To me, this is a picture of a person surrendering to the spirit, whether good or bad. And lastly, we have the letter Mem. Mem was originally squiggly lines, kind of like a child drawing water, and it stood for water, chaos, blood, and the womb. A closed mem stands for the inability to reproduce, while an open mem stands for the ability to be fruitful and multiply. So if we take the meanings of their letters in their original context, we discover that this word is implying that there was blood and chaos, men yielding to some spirit, whether good or bad, pregnancy and birth, and they were being yoked or bound to something that in this case was probably not good. In this case, the fact that pregnancy and birth were associated with the letters of the word tells me that there were activities such as marriage taking place, or unholy matrimony in some form, when we know from reading Genesis 6:4 that this is exactly what was going on. So the narrative of Genesis 6:4 is written in the word lachem, and that's something to think about. All right, so one of the possible variations of this word has another interesting meaning as well. The word lachem can also mean to wound, to swallow greedily, to burn, to rankle, and in some cases, to conceive. The fact that conceive is even listed as a possible meaning is baffling to me. And then even deeper than that, the word to rankle is not a word that is used by chance here. There's no such thing as chance. The word rankle, when you do a word study on it, has quite the etymology. Rankle comes from a Middle English, which came from an old French word rancler, which is derived its origins from the alteration of a medieval Latin word dracunculus, which is diminutive of the Latin word draco for serpent, or draconta, dragon. So if we reread the tail end part of Genesis 6:4, it says, the sons of God came into the daughters of Adam. They bore them serpents or dragons. Those are the mighty ones, the men of name, image, mark, or renown that polluted the outside of the temple. Isn't that something? So that's the first time humans mix their DNA with serpents and beasts. And really, I didn't put this in the book, but if you go through and read the list of the children of Cain, about the third or fourth generation, Irad, his name means a wild donkey dragon. So it was a human mixed with a donkey, which is weird, mixed with a dragon. And then you have Jubal Cain, etc., and they all had animalistic characteristics, and it said that they used the ram's horn to create music. It's where we get the word jubilee. We'll get into that another time. But it's not a coincidence that they had those features. And if you look back at those, the Kokopelli in those cave paintings that date back, they say hundreds of years, thousands of years. And they have the anthropomorphic pictures and stuff. There seems to always be a Kokopelli there while they're doing rituals and sacrifices. Just something for you to go off on your own tangent about. So, I found that interesting. Now, I'd like to add that the word used for dinosaurs, and this will take us into the next chapter. The word used for dinosaurs before Sir Richard Owen coined the term in 1841 was dragon. All dinosaurs were called dragons. Before 1841, dinosaurs were simply known as dragons. My speculation is that if the powers that be, demons, wanted to hide their origins, then calling themselves by another name and coming up with a new theory like evolution would be a great way to do that. It is not a coincidence that dinosaurs typically resemble a reptilian ancestry. And that, my friends, would lead us into the next chapter, which will be the origin of dinosaurs. So if you want to hear about the origin of dinosaurs, come back next week and we'll talk about that. Now, I have 5 minutes to look at y'all's comments, perhaps questions, and see what you have to say. Let's see. Thought the book of Enoch didn't make the cut. Yeah, it didn't, and I'm saying that's why it didn't. I assume that the Nephilim were not stable genetically or something. Why did they die out? The Nephilim didn't die out. They're fallen angels. They're chained up in hell. Is there a mention about dinosaurs in the book of Job? Yeah, but they're not really dinosaurs at that point in the book of Job. We'll get into that. Let's see. What strength it has in its own loins, what power the muscles of its belly, its tail sways like a cedar, the sinews of its thighs are close-knit. I don't think that was a dinosaur. I mean, it could have been. I think that was one of the beasts that lived in the water that could come onto land. It describes Leviathan as leaving its tracks in the mud on dry land. So Leviathan crawls on its belly. And it's funny how when I talk about this topic, the internet signal seems to go down and get a little laggy and stuff. So, hey, Zio, how's it going? So, I guess I'll wrap it up here. Like and subscribe, share with your friends and family. Get the word out, spread the word. This book is going to be available very soon. I'm looking forward to sharing it with everybody. All right, until next time, love you guys. Be blessed, and I will see you again very soon. Let's see, someone said Genesis 1:24. Yeah, that talks about the dragons, Genesis 1:24, but not dinosaurs. Dinosaurs are completely different. We'll cover that at a different time. All right, love you guys. Be blessed. I'll see you next week when we will talk about the origin of dinosaurs, and it's going to blow your mind. Trust me, it's going to blow your mind. Love you guys. Bye.